Hey everybody, and welcome to the first lecture for the University of Ekaterine. I am William Sommerfeld, the Dean of the University, as well as the Dean for the Micronational Studies and Government program. In this lecture, we're going to be actually discussing what a micronation is. I myself have over a decade of experience with micronations, although most of which is with virtual micronations, either on the internet forum boards or within the realm of Second Life. But as from what I've seen, pretty much all the theory and everything kind of coalesces together. But basically, the purpose of this lecture is to help you as individuals or as budding micronationalists to understand actually what a micronation is and how it differs from, other sorts of boards or other sorts of political experiments or what have you. But anyways, let's begin. The basic definition of a micronation is basically a fictional country that exists either in the real world or in like a fictitious sense. It might necessarily not be tactile, but it has a sort of culture and a construction to it. Individuals will call themselves micronationalists, which I myself am one, and if you're at this university, you are one yourself. They can exist either in the real world as, a principality that is too small to where world governments such as the United States or Russia or the United Nations or the European Union or what have you don't recognize them. In a sense, kind of similar to Western Sahara or, maybe some other small countries in South America or Africa or Asia that most people don't know of. There's also other instances such as Sealand, which was a attempted micronation, a real-world one that basically involved a abandoned seaport off the coast of England that was taken over, and the guy proclaimed that, oh yeah, we've got a country, but that didn't end too well. And then there's other examples like the ones I'm usually involved in, and the ones you'll see most often within this university, which are virtual micronations. And these micronations exist either solely on the internet, over a forum board, or an IRC channel, or a combination of any of that. And then there's examples which exist within Second Life. Now, unfortunately, there are very few examples in Second Life that exist today. Although back when I was still running Falcasia, which I'll get to in a little while, there was maybe 5, 6 of them, and it was a pretty decent sized community. But the big difference depends obviously in whether it's real and tactile or virtual. Now, for the majority of this lecture, I'm going to be discussing virtual micronations because that's personally what I have more experience with and I feel most comfortable discussing. Now, talking about Falcasia, which I mentioned earlier, that was the name of the micronation I ran from roughly 2007 to 2012 within Second Life. And I'll probably be doing another lecture entirely on Falcasia. But for the purposes of this, Falcasia is an example of a solely virtual micronation. Now, while it existed in part outside of the realm of Second Life, it was predominantly contained within the online world. Now, that being said, it did have external parts to it, like a forum board and a discussion board and an IRC channel, and there was a lot of emails exchanged and stuff like that. But for all intents and purposes, it was solely encapsulated, and all contact involved with it was in a virtual world. Now, as far as micronations, how they work, there are obviously two different types. As I said, there's real-world micronations, and then there's virtual or Second Life micronations. Real-world micronations are literally real-world nations. They are institutions which are a group of like-minded people who have gotten together in a physical location, maybe an office building or an apartment, or in the case of Sealand, they got together on an abandoned seafort off the coast of a country and decided to run a pirate radio. But aside from that, there's a tactile element to these real-world micronations where people actually meet face-to-face. They have a physical meeting place. They literally have a tactile, physical location where they meet and they claim as their own. And there's also a face-to-face interaction which adds the human element and the the sociology aspect and the government aspect. Now, I'm not too familiar with real-world micronations, like I've been saying, so I can't really speak on those. However, with Second Life and virtual micronations, they involve a virtual environment, which, for the benefit of that, allows multiple people across multiple countries and continents and time zones to get together and interact with each other in a virtual world that can be created and sculpted to the purposes that the owners or the operators or the politicians of that country need. Now, the reason why I prefer these is because it makes it a lot easier to adapt the situation or what you have available to a particular country or a particular group, and you can find what works for you and it's good. There's a lot of flexibility in this, which, like I said, advocates to a wide range of individuals. The only downside, or some might argue an upside, is that it's reliant heavily on roleplay. Role-playing as a citizen, or as a president, or as a premier, or as a military soldier, or as a general, or as a business individual. With citizen participation, you're pretending, or not necessarily pretending, but playing the role of a citizen, not just in the virtual world, but in real-world micronations as well. But with virtual micronations especially, it is really, really heavy on that. And without user input and participation, there cannot be that creation of a micronation or that evolution of culture and a span of history that's self-created. Excuse me. As far as micronations are concerned, though, they do provide a great area for thought experiments to conduct differing experiments in politics, to see how cultures grow and interact. And at the very least, they provide a location where individuals can express free thought. And at the very end of the day, who does not like being the dictator or the high poobah or the president of their own little country? I know I did. Alright, so now that you know what a micronation is, let's talk for a minute about what a micronation isn't. Through my experience, specifically on Second Life, I'm going to be focusing for now on the virtual micronations, because I don't have a lot of experience with the real-world ones. But specifically on Second Life, I've noticed that there tends to be a lot of confusion between a micronation, a military or an SL military or an army or whatever, and a city RP. Now, these latter two, I can understand why you would get confused, because a micronation is essentially a combination of a whole bunch of different aspects of all sorts of things. Now, in the real world, nations have militaries, I understand. The difference, though, is that a micronation within Second Life, or within the real world, or within a virtual context, they can have an army, but that army is not the country. Now, I understand that armies are usually what draw people to the micronation. I've learned this through experience. That does not necessarily mean that the army is the country. Now, the way I look at it is a micronation has a government, and as part of that government, there's a military, compared to militaries, which are the military, and that military is also the government, kind of creating a country that's under martial law. And to be honest, not much can happen if the military is so dominant over that particular region. Now, as far as a city RP goes, I can understand where they're coming from. There's like I just said with militaries, there's a great deal of city RP stuff within a micronation. Typically micronations have their capital city built out. There's a lot of talk and going around the town and shops and houses and all of that. But the thing is unlike the interaction being centered around the different factions, the police and the firefighters and the criminals and the construction workers, it is the government as the overarching aspect, and then the people are the ones who actually do the interaction with each other. There are no predefined roles, there's no city, there's no storyline beyond what you give yourself. There's all sorts of actions you can do. It's a living environment, which I think is what makes it different from a city role play. With that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for future episodes that should be coming within a couple of days, hopefully culminating in a lecture on how to create your own micronation, which should be pretty cool. Anyways, and as always, thank you for watching. I hope this was interesting and a learning experience, and we shall see you soon.